Zainab's flight from Accra had been long, but she didn't mind. She had just sealed an important deal for her company, and the thought of finally resting in her own bed kept her smiling the whole ride home. She pictured a hot shower, a cup of tea, and maybe even a call to her fiancé to share the good news. Home was supposed to feel safe, warm, and waiting. But as the taxi pulled up to her gate, her smile froze. Her eyes widened in disbelief. There, lying in a messy heap on the ground, were her clothes, shoes, handbags, and even her suitcases. The dust from the roadside clung to them, some of her dresses half crumpled in the mud. For a moment, she just stood there, too stunned to move. This wasn't a prank. It felt deliberate, like someone had wanted her to see it this way. Her chest tightened as confusion rushed through her. She dragged her bags closer, her heart pounding louder with every step. Then her eyes caught something fixed to the gate. A small folded paper, taped neatly right at eye level, fluttering lightly in the evening breeze. Zainab's throat went dry. She didn't need to touch it to know it wasn't going to be good. The neatness of it, the way it was waiting for her, felt almost cruel. She reached out slowly, her hand trembling as she peeled the note from the gate. Before even opening it, a shiver ran down her spine. Whatever was inside, she could feel it. Her life was about to change. Zainab stood at the gate, her fingers shaking as she unfolded the paper. The evening air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath with her. She expected maybe an explanation, maybe even an apology, but the words on the page were sharp and cold, written in bold letters that made her chest ache. "You are no longer welcome here." That was the first line, and it cut straight through her. She blinked, hoping she had misread it, but the rest of the note only sank her deeper. The writer spoke as if she had betrayed her own family, as if she had chosen a different life and turned her back on them. There were hints of truths that would come to light soon, and accusations buried between the lines. No names were mentioned, but the message was clear. Someone wanted her out, and they wanted her broken. Her knees felt weak, and for a moment, she pressed the note against her chest as if holding it closer would somehow make it less cruel. She thought of all the sacrifices she had made, long nights of work, the trips she took to build a future not only for herself but for her family too. And now, instead of a welcome home, she was being thrown out like a stranger. But as tears stung her eyes, something inside her shifted. Beneath the shock and pain, a spark of anger began to grow. Who had done this? Who had dared to push her out of her own home and speak of betrayal when she had given nothing but loyalty? Her heart was breaking, but her pride refused to collapse. She looked back at her clothes scattered across the dirt, then at the note still trembling in her hand. If the goal was to shame her, they had succeeded, for the moment. Neighbors had probably seen her belongings tossed outside like garbage. But Zainab was not the type to hide her face in defeat. She folded the paper again, slipped it into her purse, and straightened her back. The pain was real, but so was the fire building inside her. She knew this wasn't just about being kicked out. There were secrets here, plots moving in the shadows. Whoever wrote that note thought she would break. Instead, they had woken something far stronger. With her luggage at her feet and the night growing darker, Zainab made a silent promise to herself. She would find out the truth. She would uncover every secret behind those words. And when she did, the people who wanted her gone would realize they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. The next morning, Zainab woke up to the sound of voices outside. She had spent the night at a small guest house nearby, her head still spinning from the cruel note and the sight of her things dumped at the gate. When she stepped out to buy breakfast, she quickly noticed how the neighbors' eyes followed her. Some looked away the moment she caught them staring, while others leaned into each other, whispering. It was the kind of silence that screamed louder than words. At first, she tried to ignore it. But as she walked down the street, an older woman she'd known since childhood pulled her aside. Her voice was low, almost cautious. "My daughter, I don't know what is happening, but while you were away, we saw your cousin Efua going in and out of your house." She carried herself like she owned the place. Zainab's heart clenched. Efua? She hadn't even known her cousin had been around. But the whispers didn't stop there. Another neighbor chimed in, shaking her head with pity. "Efua said you left, that you chose your business and money over your family. She told us you abandoned them and didn't plan to return." People believed her because she was always around the house, speaking for them. The words stung worse than the note. Abandoned? The very family she had worked herself to the bone for now thought she had turned her back on them? Zainab felt a rush of heat rise in her chest. This wasn't just gossip. It was a story carefully planted to destroy her name before she even set foot back home. She pieced it together in her mind. Efua hadn't simply been helping out while she was gone. She had stepped into Zainab's life, little by little, shaping a narrative that would push her out completely. Every whisper from the neighbors, every pitying glance, felt like proof that this betrayal had been in motion long before Zainab's return. As she walked back to the guest house, her ears still burning from the murmurs around her, the reality sank in. This wasn't just about family drama. This was a takeover. Efua wanted more than just influence. She wanted control. She wanted Zainab erased. Zainab clutched her bag tighter, her steps steady even though her heart was racing. If Efua thought she could manipulate the family and turn the community against her, she was wrong. Yes, the betrayal cut deep, but Zainab wasn't the type to bow out quietly. She had fought too hard in life to let whispers and lies steal her future. The neighbors might see her as the woman who abandoned her people, but soon they would see the truth. And when that truth came out, it would not only clear her name, but also expose the snake hiding in plain sight. This was no accident, it was a plan. And now, Zainab was ready to fight back. Lying awake that night, Zainab stared at the ceiling of the guesthouse room, her mind replaying the past few weeks like pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized were connected. At the time, everything had seemed normal, maybe just small quirks she brushed off. But now, with Efua's betrayal out in the open and her family's silence weighing heavily on her, those little moments took on a new meaning. She remembered Efua sitting with her in the kitchen 2 days before her trip. The conversation had seemed innocent enough, but Efua had asked strange, almost nosy question. How long will you be in Accra? Are you going straight to the airport or staying somewhere first? Who will be around the house while you're gone? At the time, Zainab had laughed it off, thinking Efua was just making small talk. But why would her cousin care so much about her movements unless she had been planning something? Her thoughts shifted to her father. Normally, he was her biggest supporter, always eager to hear about her work and proud of her independence. But in the days leading up to her departure, he barely met her eyes. When she told him about the deal she was traveling to close, he gave only a half smile and muttered, "Safe journey." No prayers, no warm hug like he usually gave. She had felt a sting then, but convinced herself he was just tired. Now it felt more like guilt. And then there was Kwame, her fiancé. The memory of him standing at her door just before she left came flooding back. He had seemed distracted, his phone constantly buzzing in his hand. When she leaned in to kiss him, he pulled back slightly, saying he was late for a meeting. She had teased him about being forgetful lately, but he only shrugged, his eyes darting away. The distance in his voice, the way he avoided her gaze, it had bothered her, but she told herself love always had its ups and downs. Now, thinking of Efua's lies and the cold note taped to her gate, that moment felt like a warning she had ignored. Each memory was like a small piece clicking into place, forming a picture that made her stomach twist. Efua's probing questions, her father's unease, Kwame's growing distance. None of it was random. They had all been part of the silence that prepared the ground for her fall. She thought of how easily she had walked out of her house with her luggage, completely unaware that the very people she trusted were plotting behind her back. Zainab sat up in bed, her chest heavy but her eyes clear. She finally understood. This betrayal had not happened overnight. It had been crafted carefully, with whispers, with avoidance, with false smile. The signs had always been there. She had just been too busy chasing success to see them. Now, the picture was clear, and it burned into her mind like fire. This was not just bad luck. This was conspiracy. And she would not rest until she uncovered every hand that played a role in it. The following day, Zainab gathered her courage and went back to the house. She refused to stand outside like a stranger. Her family was inside, and she deserved answers. When she stepped into the compound, the atmosphere was heavy. Her father sat quietly, avoiding her eyes, while a few relatives shuffled around, pretending to be busy. Efua was there too, her face calm but her smile sharp, like she was already in control. Zainab didn't waste time. She held up the folded note and asked, her voice steady though her hands shook. "Who wrote this? Why was my property thrown out? What is going on here?" The room went silent. Finally, Efua spoke first, tilting her head slightly, almost mockingly. "Sometimes people must accept when their time is over." Her words sent a chill through Zainab, but before she could answer, her father murmured, "It is better you accept your fate, my daughter." Her fate? The words hit like a slap. She looked around the room, searching for even one face that would stand up for her, but all she saw were lowered eyes and tight lips. Betrayal was everywhere. Zainab left the house that day more determined than ever. If they thought she would roll over and vanish quietly, they were wrong. She went straight to her lawyer, a man she trusted with her business dealing. She explained everything, the note, the rumors, the strange silence of her family. He listened carefully and suggested they start by checking her financial record. That evening, Zainab sat with her laptop, her lawyer on the phone guiding her as she logged into her accounts. Her pulse raced with every click. At first, everything looked fine. But then, line by line, her stomach dropped. Transactions she didn't recognize. Transfers made while she was away. Signatures that looked like hers but weren't. Her lawyer's voice grew sharp over the phone. "These are forged. Someone has been moving your money and tampering with your assets. This is no small mistake, Zainab. It's deliberate." Her chest tightened as reality hit her. It wasn't only about throwing her out of the house or spreading lies in the neighborhood. This was bigger. Someone had gone after her life's work, her sweat, her future. She scrolled through the records, each number stabbing her deeper. It was like watching her hard-earned empire crumble piece by piece. But even as the shock sank in, a fire lit inside her. Whoever had done this thought she would be too broken to fight back. They had underestimated her. Zainab wasn't the type to give up what she had built with her bare hand. She closed her laptop slowly, her face calm but her mind sharp. They had tampered with her money, her name, even her family ties. But they had not touched her spirit. That was untouchable. And now, she was ready to dig until every truth was dragged into the light. Days passed with Zainab digging quietly, her lawyer helping her trace the strange transactions. Each discovery led to another, and the pieces of the puzzle slowly came together. What she uncovered made her blood run cold. The trail didn't just point to Efua. It led straight to Kwame, the man she had once trusted with her heart. At first, she couldn't believe it. Kwame, her fiancé? The same man who had promised her forever, who had once sworn to protect her. But the evidence was undeniable. Some of the forged signatures were tied to accounts only Kwame had access to. Documents showed Efua and Kwame's names appearing together in places they had no reason to be. It was all too neat, too connected to be coincident. Zainab sat in silence as her lawyer laid it out plainly. Efua and Kwame had formed a secret alliance. While she was away, they had worked hand in hand, weaving lies around her. Efua poisoned the family with whispers that Zainab had abandoned them. Kwame used his closeness to her to slip into places where he could access her records and property files. Together, they painted her as selfish and absent, making sure she stood alone when they struck. The betrayal cut deep. It wasn't just about money or property anymore. It was personal. Efua was blood, and Kwame was supposed to be her future. To know they had sat together, planning her downfall, laughing over her trust, made her chest ache like a fresh wound. She pictured Kwame's distracted look before her trip, Efua's curious questions, her father's unease. Everything now made painful sense. For a long while, Zainab just stared at the ceiling of her guesthouse room, the truth weighing on her like a stone. She could have cried. She could have collapsed under the weight of betrayal. But the tears refused to come. Instead, something else stirred inside her, a quiet, burning resolve. If Efua and Kwame thought she would crumble, they were wrong. They had spent so much effort building a lie, underestimating the very woman who had built an empire from nothing. Zainab wasn't broken. She was awake. She began to imagine their faces when the truth came out, when every carefully planted lie unraveled. Efua with her smug smile, Kwame with his false charm, both exposed for the snakes they were. The thought gave her strength. She didn't need their love, their loyalty, or their approval. She only needed the truth, and she had it now. That night, Zainab folded every document, every piece of evidence into a neat file. She placed it on the table beside her bed and whispered to herself, "They wanted me to be weak. Instead, they've made me stronger." The betrayal burned like fire, but fire was not only for destruction, it was also for forging steel. And Zainab knew she was turning into something they could never break. Zainab knew this was not the time for loud confrontations or emotional outbursts. Efua and Kwame had already painted her as unstable and selfish, and if she reacted recklessly, she would only give them more power. No, this battle had to be fought with patience, with evidence, and with a strategy sharp enough to cut them down quietly before they even realized what was happening. The first person she called was her lawyer. Together, they spent hours going over every detail, the forged documents, the strange transfers, the property files that had been tampered with. Her lawyer urged her to keep calm and keep everything documented. "Paper never lies," he said firmly. Zainab nodded, writing down dates, saving copies of emails, and organizing her evidence into neat folders. Each page felt like a weapon being sharpened for the war ahead. But she knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. She reached out to one of her most trusted business allies, a woman named Amina, who had stood by her through past challenges. When Zainab laid everything out, the lies, the betrayal, the financial theft, Amina's eyes widened with fury. "They think you're alone," she said, gripping Zainab's hand. "But they have no idea how strong you really are." That reassurance gave Zainab the courage she needed. Day by day, she gathered more proof. She quietly visited the bank to confirm suspicious withdrawals, matching them with Kwame's activities. She checked property records at the land office, finding Efua's name scribbled in places where it had no business being. Every discovery made her angrier, but also calmer, more focused. She realized that rage could cloud her judgment, but patience would deliver the perfect revenge. At night, when the world was quiet, she sat at her desk in the guest house and arranged her files. She highlighted forged signatures, printed out bank statements, and even recorded whispered testimonies from neighbors who had seen Efua acting like the new lady of the house. Piece by piece, the picture of betrayal grew sharper. She imagined how Efua and Kwame were probably still laughing together, celebrating their success. They believed they had won. But Zainab knew the best victories weren't rushed. They were delivered slowly, at the exact moment when the enemy thought they were safe. One evening, after finishing her notes, she closed her folder and leaned back in her chair. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small smile. Not because the pain was gone, it wasn't, but because she could finally see the endgame. Efua and Kwame had built their alliance on lies, but Zainab was building her counterattack on truth, on hard evidence that could not be denied. They had stolen her home, her reputation, even her money. But soon she would take back everything, and more. And when that day came, the silence in the room wouldn't be hers. It would be theirs. The family compound was tense that evening. Chairs were pulled into a circle, and everyone was gathered, her father, aunts, uncles, cousins, even a few neighbors who had been invited to witness. At the center sat Efua, her chin lifted proudly, her smile wide as if she had already won. Kwame was beside her, leaning back with his arms crossed, that same smug smirk playing on his lips. To them, this was the final nail in Zainab's coffin. Zainab walked in quietly, carrying a neat brown folder under her arm. Her face gave nothing away. No anger, no fear, just calm determination. She greeted everyone politely and sat down, placing the folder on her lap. The room buzzed with whispers until her father cleared his throat. "We are here to talk about this matter once and for all," he said, though his voice was unsteady. Efua leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "There is nothing more to talk about. Zainab abandoned this family. She chose her business over her blood. We all saw it. She left us behind. And now, she is trying to claim what she no longer deserves." A few relatives nodded weakly, not because they believed her fully, but because her confidence was loud and commanding. Zainab didn't argue. She simply reached into her folder and pulled out the crumpled note that had greeted her at the gate. She laid it on the table, her eyes never leaving Efua's face. "This," she said softly, "was my welcome home." The room went quiet. Some leaned closer to read the harsh words. Her father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Then, without pause, Zainab pulled out the first set of documents, bank statements. She slid them across the table. "Here are the accounts that were tampered with while I was away. Money transferred without my consent. Forged signatures." Her lawyer, seated quietly at the back, nodded in agreement. Gasps filled the room as eyes darted from the papers to Efua and Kwame. Efua scoffed, waving her hand. Anyone could have done that. Zainab didn't flinch. She pulled out another paper, this time a property record, stamped and signed. "Here is proof that Efua's name was added illegally to one of my property. A land officer confirmed it." She placed it down firmly. Murmurs grew louder now, doubt spreading across the faces of relatives. Zainab wasn't finished. She turned to Kwame, locking eyes with him. "And here," she pulled out emails and transfer slips. "Our transactions traced to accounts only you had access to. While I was away, the two of you worked together. You spread lies to this family, painted me as selfish, and tried to take everything I worked for." Kwame's smirk faltered, his jaw tightening. Efua opened her mouth to protest, but the weight of the evidence silenced her. The room was heavy, filled with shock. Zainab leaned back, her voice calm but steady. "You thought I would come back broken, but I came back prepared." For the first time that night, it wasn't Efua's voice or Kwame's smirk that controlled the room. It was Zainab's truth. And the silence that followed was louder than any lie they had told. Zainab knew exposing Efua and Kwame to the family wasn't enough. Their lies had been spread far beyond the neighbors whispered. The church members looked at her with pity, and online, Efua had already begun painting herself as the loyal cousin who stepped in when Zainab abandoned her people. If Zainab stayed quiet, the world would only remember the rumors, not the truth. She had to clear her name, and she had to do it publicly. The following Sunday, she walked into church with her head high. People stared, some whispering, some pretending not to see her at all. Efua was there too, sitting in the front row, smiling sweetly as though nothing had happened. Kwame sat beside her, his hand resting possessively on her arm. Zainab waited until the announcements ended, then asked the pastor if she could speak. The pastor, who had known her since she was a child, hesitated, but something in her steady gaze made him nod. Zainab stood before the congregation, holding a stack of papers. Her voice was clear and calm. "I know many of you have heard things about me, that I abandoned my family, that I cared more about money than the people who raised me. But today, I want you to see the truth for yourselves." She held up the note that had been taped to her gate, then displayed the forged documents, the fake transfers, the land records. Gasps filled the church. Mothers shook their heads. Men muttered angrily under their breath. Efua's face turned stiff, her smile frozen. Kwame shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting around the room. The more Zainab spoke, the heavier the silence grew. She didn't shout, she didn't cry. She simply laid the truth bare. By the time she was done, there was no room left for doubt. Word spread quickly. By the afternoon, neighbors were gathered outside her gate, buzzing with the news. Those who had once whispered behind her back now whispered about Efua and Kwame. How could they do this to their own blood? One woman said loudly. Greedy snakes, another muttered. Zainab didn't stop there. She uploaded the evidence online, careful to blur private details, but leaving enough proof for anyone to see what had been done. The post went viral in her community. Comments flooded in, some apologizing for believing the lies, others praising her courage. They tried to break her, but she stood strong. One post read, shared hundreds of times. Efua and Kwame, once confident and smug, could no longer walk freely without people pointing, whispering, or shaking their heads in disgust. Their names became tied not to power or respect, but to betrayal and greed. As for Zainab, the humiliation she had suffered, her clothes thrown in the dirt, her name dragged through gossip, was now replaced by respect. People began to see her not as a victim, but as a fighter. She had turned her pain into power, and that transformation made her larger than the lies ever could. Zainab, once the woman shamed at her own gate, now walked her streets as a symbol of resilience. And everywhere she went, the murmurs had changed, from gossip to admiration. Weeks later, Zainab stood at her gate once more, but this time, everything was different. The dust had been swept, her clothes were back inside where they belonged, and the locks were hers again. With the help of her lawyer, she had secured her assets, updated every document, and put new protections in place so no one could tamper with her future again. Her home was hers, not just by name, but by power and proof. The very same family members who had turned their faces away now came to her, their voices soft, their eyes filled with guilt. Some begged for forgiveness, others tried to explain their silence. Even her father, who had once told her to accept her fate, looked at her with regret. Efua and Kwame, stripped of their fake confidence, tried to plead their case, but their words fell flat. Zainab listened, but her heart was no longer soft for them. She had carried their betrayal like a wound, and now that it had healed into strength, she refused to bow. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the compound grew quiet, Zainab closed her gate slowly and firmly. In her hand, she held the same folded note that had once left her trembling. She stared at it for a long moment, then let a small, steady smile cross her face. "This note was meant to break me," she whispered into the evening air, locking the gate with a final click. "But instead, it built me." With that, she turned and walked inside, not as the woman they had thrown out, but as the woman who had risen stronger than all of them combined.